Let's see, something, how about Araby?
We did Araby also. That was the
You
first
did?
one we did.
Yeah, I guess they're not, the
They
titles
probably,
don't stick in my
they probably
mind.
come to your mind because we already read them. So
Oh, I'm just, okay, something that's not too long. How about Counterparts is one of the longer ones. But
counterparts.
Okay.
102.
Oh, okay. That's only 8 pages, supposedly.
That's okay. Yeah, 95 and 5.
Yeah, it's
14.
Oh,
No,
okay. Counterpart. All right.
All right.
we'll try it.
Okay. So I guess I'll start and let me say hello to all of you out there in YouTube land who might be watching this at some point. Monday Book Club today is going to read 2 stories, one from Elizabeth Bowen from her collected stories called The Good Girl. This is a story that she wrote from the 30s. And then the Dubliner story, which we're going to read and then contrast to the Bowen story, is Counterparts. Counterparts. All right. Good. Now let me get back to where I can see my companions. Got that. Okay, here we go. Elizabeth Bowen, The Good Girl. I've restored my faith in life, concluded Captain Monteparnisi. He straightened out his gloves to the last finger, laid them down on the table, and gazed at Monica. She could only gaze at the Alps. It was solemn, wonderfully lit church. She was 22. This, her third proposal, seemed a distinct echo. The Alps, so distantly brightly painted over the bright lake, offered no inspiration, though from this very terrace they must have been consulted. His passion, however, was the purest. He was a Milanese of good family. He was still waiting, and she didn't know what to say. The evening of her arrival in April half-light, they had discovered themselves advancing towards each other down an immense corridor. They trod a magenta carpet fresh as the spring season. To this, in passing, he had lowered his eyes delicately. They passed. For both the perspective became forlorn. Those were seconds charged with fatality. At dinner, he, from his distant table, gave their party his courteous, veiled attention. Not me.
Oh, sorry, it's me. I turned it on, put it on silent. Sorry. I could see it coming up, but I didn't realize it was going to make noise. Sorry.
Naturally, it had been Dagmar who, ash blonde, made play with her dark eyelids. Yet Monica had what her French friend, the Baron de Besserat, called je ne sais quoi. That night, this had been in evidence, had been remarkable even to Uncle Porgy, and heaven knew he was preoccupied. Uncle Porgy lifted his glass to twinkle in the pink
Is that again? Sorry. I turned it off.
Okay. Anyway, lifted his glass to twinkle in the pink lamplight and paid Monica tribute. She's a damn pretty girl, and a good girl, too. Yet all the time under the table, he had been pursuing Dagmar's foot. With hers, when hers withdrew, he gave chase with audible pounces over the parquet. The pursuit gained in speed and compass until there seemed to be no place under their table for the feet of a good girl. Next, please.
you want to go, Katrina, or will I go? Will I go? Okay. Uncle Porgy was not anyone's uncle. That was his disappointment, he said. He had no niece. He had invited Monica to call him uncle also, since she was Dagmar's cousin. And when he invited her to accompany them to Italy, Dagmar declared she must. So Monica gently bounced across Italy in the back seat of the Rose beside the valet. Captain Montparnasse now tenderly coughed. Life, replied Monica, is so difficult. I place my life in your hands, he said helplessly. Oh, thank you, Captain Montparnasse. So she got up carefully as though balancing his life. She needed time to think. He understood perfectly. He kissed her right, then her left hand, then returned both regretfully. She walked away between the attendant tulips. Captain Montparnasse brought out his pocketbook from against his heart and made some calculations. He sighed. He was not a rich man. Then he went round to the garage for another look at the Rolls Royce. The Angelus came sweetly across the lake, but Dagmar, sitting out on her loggia, frowned at a tulip tree in extravagant blossom. She was beautiful, arms, neck of supple ivory, her pale hair brushed, you would think with a gold-powered brush, petal curled at the nape. But that does not keep a girl going forever, and nothing could have been more provoking than Uncle Porgy, who was kissing his way up her arm. Mine, she said, and pushed his head crossly as Monica stepped through the window. Their gold wicker chairs creaked. Darling, where have you been? I've been so lonely. We've been talking about Rome. Uncle Porgy, straightening his tie, smiled at Monica in the friendliest way possible. Might not Rome be jolly? He knew of a thundering good hotel. But it's so far, said Monica, and had, with surprise, a small pang. The heart, then, was not intact. No, surely it's all in Italy. Next, please. You're on mute, Katrina.
Yeah.
Mute.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
The Rolls Royce did, it is true, make short work of Italy, which is a country smaller than you would think. The Rolls had eaten up the Milan Varese autostrada at what Uncle Porgy called a smooth 80. He had often heard of this autostrada, on which there is no speed limit, and now he only regretted that the antiquities of this remarkable country could not be ranged for inspection along its smooth white curbs. At Varese, the autostrada had come to an end unaccountably, so here they all were. It seemed nice. You sat on the terrace where tulips lifted gay little cups of light. In immediate response to the suggestion, electric bells depending from plane trees connected the terrace with the bar. Judas and almond trees frivoled among the austere cedars. Cypresses marched to the lake from terrace to terrace, and wax yellow freesias sweetened the April twilight. Placards forbidding children to play on the terrace discouraged Italian family life. English and Americans fervently elsewhere overlooked Varese. Antiquities did not impend. The view, though tasteful, was unexigent. The inhabitants of Varese were occupied in the manufacture of stockings. It seemed delightful that they should be so busy. Work, Uncle Porgy believed, kept men happy, that and the society of beautiful women. He sighed often, looked at the lake. He was a bit of an idealist. Visitors arriving in pairs down the autostrada in a succession of whirring flashes were expected to provide their own entertainment. In prolonged seclusion, they fulfilled the expectations of the management. Cherry-clad little boys shot up in the lifts with bottles of champagne in buckets. Next, please.
All this seems strange to Monica. She had finished reading her book about Leonardo da Vinci, then the afternoon after arrival, had taken a walking stick and a hotel dog and walked by the high-walled alleys down to the lake. Here she found mud flats, washing, stark damp reeds, nobody about. The lake was intended for distant scenery. She spoke Italian to a child who ran away, then she walked up again. On the terrace, she had come across Captain Montparnasse engaged in sadness. He patted the dog. I love dogs, he said. It's almost a madness with me. In the course of their conversation, he had forthwith explained that he was a solitary man, a widower. He was fortunate that he loved nature. But in the heart, he said, of so much beauty, one feels oneself alone. In fact, he spoke English remarkably well. Sport, he had said, is also a madness to him. It was to be seen that Monica was a sports girl. That was on Monday. Since it had all blossomed, today, Thursday, they talked about going away to Rome. I'm sorry you don't like Rome, Dagmar said, discouraged. It sounds to me so historic. Uncle Porgy, if you're going down to the bar, let Alessandro know that I'd like a sidecar. He'll send it up. Uncle Porgy, blowing out his cheeks like a puto attending Aurora in one of those rather confused processions, patted Dagmar's knee, then trotted down to the bar. He was most suggestible. Next, please.
Yeah, yawned Dagmar. Yeah, okay. She threw her arms over her head and kicked one of her gilt-heeled slippers across the loggia. Monica blushed with honesty. Dagmar, I do think we ought to be clear, about Uncle Porgy. I had no idea when we left England that he was so much not an uncle as all that. Oh dear, Dagmar said, resigned. I am so stupid. I never knew what anybody is talking about. I do sometimes wonder if we ought not to go home. Oh, I'm not going home by train, I can tell you that's definitely. Darling, you wouldn't be mean and leave me. After all, Monica, men aren't everything. I've never allowed them to count in my life. She should know men had not been nice to her. She had had to break off several engagements and leave her husband. Uncle Porgy called her his brave little woman. Darling, let Alexandrino in. He's got my sidecar. Alexandria was knocking portentously like a postman. The hotel service was most discreet. Monica put out Dagmar's evening things for her, untangled the long pearl rope, and opened some new powder. It made Dagmar tired to watch her. She sighed and went through to the bath. Soon she said plaintively through the open door, talk to me. Tell me things. I get so bored, all alone here in my bath. Steam, curling through the ivory bedroom, clouded the mirrors. Monica, relieved of her own pink reflections, was able to bring out, as a matter of fact, Captain Montparnasse wants me to marry him. Wants you to what? Marry him. Who does? Captain Montparnasse. Oh dear. There were some seconds of splashing and slow reflection. It's a pity his legs are like that. He was a cavalry officer. He must have held onto the horse very tight with his legs. Even so, they are short. I do like him best sitting down, but he seems very idealistic and fond of the open air. Italians are fearfully passionate, said Dagmar gloomily. I know a girl who got bitten by an Italian, but as I said, this is just their way. Does he make love in English? Dagmar did not quite understand. Monica said, he tells me about his life. Oh, that's kind. Monica, come and wrap little Dagmar up in a big bath towel. Really, I don't know what you will do in Rome with all those Italians. I think you're marvelous. Look, you must introduce him to us after dinner, after all. I am your chaperone, and Uncle Porgy is practically your guardian. I really think, Monica, you should have done that before, when you felt all this coming on. But I can never find you. Oh, nonsense, darling. We're always about. Next, please.
The introduction was not a success. Uncle Porgy could not somehow stomach a Dago, but did his best. Monica, in pale pink, found herself sitting closer to Captain Montparnasse than she had expected. Captain Parnassi attentively looked at Dagmar, who wore her hair a floating lily-wise on the social current. Her smiles went hesitatingly to all of them, tender as young butterflies. Sometimes her smiles for Captain Montparnasse were frequent and flashing. They sat grouped by an indoor fountain. They are nervous, said Captain Montparnasse, pointing to the goldfish. Goldfish are highly nervous, impossible to tame. I hear you are fond of animals. I had a horse once that was shot under me. Oh dear, whatever did you do then? But something swelled in Monica's throat at the thought of the horse. She wanted to drop her head and weep where there had been an epaulette. Horses, said Uncle Porgy, are like women, temperamental and fickle. Never know where you have them. And, oh horror, his foot went creeping towards Dagmar's. It would make any goldfish nervous, exclaimed Monica quickly, living under a fountain. Her friend replied, one accustoms oneself to everything. He behaved, in fact, with infinite sensibility, but afterwards, out on the terrace, he confessed he did not care for her aunt's lover. He did not find him an English type. But you, he added, are my flower. Next, please.
She had not the heart to disagree with him. Pure, he exclaimed and kissed her shoulder. Behind them, the band thrilled in the empty ballroom. Tulips, gold ghost crowded up to the windows. Cypresses gathered unseen, tense. She felt quite his own, but she also felt bound to explain. She's not my aunt, and he is not her uncle. He exclaimed, my flower, ravished by her remark, kissing her as low on the chest as her décollage permitted. Oh, I don't think, but murmuring indistinctly, he began to be rather Italian. She had never produced this effect before. Tiens, she could have explained, but really. Then she thought of her mother at Chislehurst and of her old school of which she hoped never to be worthy. From the night air, or because heaven had intervened, she sneezed loudly and uncontrollably. Stepping back from the portico as she went in, he accepted her good night. He blew his nose. You would think he had never panted with great emotion. It became once more evident that his passion was of the purest. How much relieved she was. Next, please.
But the lounge was staring and still. A great many mirrors reflected its emptiness. Everybody was elsewhere. No one else in the hotel tried to be good. The lift sighed up with Monica. Dagmar's room was empty. An outraged clock ticked angrily in the darkness. Below, the band still throbbed on. The band had been hours silent before Dagmar came up. In the course of the next day, Monica found herself becoming, by imperceptible degrees, engaged to Captain Montparnasse. He constituted public opinion, for she saw no one else. Dagmar and Uncle Porgy were busy always. Round corners she heard chairs creak as they bent over maps of Rome. That night she received, with surprise but gratification, what appeared to be the betrothal kiss. He left a rose in her place at dinner. Afterwards they danced a waltz, a foxtrot, and then a one-step together in the empty ballroom. The lonely band appeared very much encouraged. Couples looked languidly in at the windows and then went away. Then he had a bottle of champagne brought out to the terrace. They drank, and feeling very much moved by the solemnity of the occasion, she talked to him of her mother, and then he spoke of his mother. And then a terrible thing happened. They had walked down the terraces, and among the lemons and cypresses had a conversation about infinity, touching also upon ideals. The conversation, with some caress in character, which its subject naturally prolonged itself. And when they returned, the hotel was shut up. Not a light shining. A clock behind in the town did indeed strike 2. Next, please.
In this leafy lakeside retreat, one retired early. Their behavior had been without precedent. Such a thing as this had never happened to Monica. She reproached her Guglielmo with some sharpness. She leaned on the door and sniffed with so much despair that he was provoked to ask her point blank if she were really an heiress. She sobbed, "Indeed not." He comforted her politely. He said, "You have always your charm." It was a long time before anybody came. Then the night porter was horrified. Dagmar was worse than horrified. She was surprised. Pointed out this was not what one had expected. Next morning, curled up in bed, curtains drawn across the insistent daylight, she said it seemed obvious they must now go at once to Rome. She doubted if the hotel would keep them. Now this had happened. Night porter had told the waiters told all the chambermaids. She said Uncle Porgy was really very much shocked. He was particular who Dagmar went about with. He had always said she could not be too careful. Till now, he had thought of Monica as a nice friend. Next, please.
Well, really, said Monica, I
Oh.
tell you,
Did I read out of turn?
yeah, but that's fine.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem. I tell you how it will be, Monica. You will end by having a baby. A girl cannot be too careful. Well, really. And an Italian and everything. Whatever. Darling Dagmar's being very, very loyal. Trembling with indignation, Monica sped down to the terrace for Guglielmo. But courteously, he declined to her through a crowd, this way, that way, right and left of a lady's head. The terrace was dark with Italian ladies who sat about him. This morning, as a surprise, his relatives had all come out by train from Milan, his aunt, his mother, his widowed sister with her children, his sister who had still to marry and wore a dark mustache. He was pleased. He had missed them. He was accustomed to family life. They sat in black with black furs in the ardent sunshine, complimenting him upon the lake, while the Alps appeared to draw nearer in fascination. They sipped aranciata, but did not remove their gloves. In so large a family, necessarily, there has always been a bereavement. Dagmar, looking down from her loggia, knew that her cousin could not have sinned with a man so large and black a family, with so large and black a family, and once more it seemed unlikely to her that Monica would ever sin. In recognition of this, passing later through Milan, she made Uncle Porgy buy Monica a pair of coral drop earrings. For some people, life held nothing. For Monica, it was simpler. As he stood up to bow, she really noticed his legs for the first time. She had never loved him. Naturally, however, she was still very much upset. She snipped the head off a tulip and walked away. It was her only gesture. Next, please.
Okay, I'll read just a little bit and then Anne.
Oh,
Okay.
yes. Thank
The
you.
family evidently were great with some information. They exchanged glances and soon it transpired they brought good news. His unmarried cousin Liliana, who had so tenderly asked for him since their childhood, had become last Friday, through the suicide of an uncle, direct heiress to the Picelli millions. So it became his duty to leave the divine panorama and hurry back to Milan. Young men might already be at her doorstep. Next, please.
Now his cousin Liliana, though no sports girl, did not keep him up past midnight discussing infinity. He was seriously tired this morning and had a slight chill on the liver, not without emotion. He shortly afterwards wrote his farewell to Monica. You restored my faith in life, he wrote. You could not have done more, but there are sterner calls. Meanwhile, his mother, a woman of tact, quietly packed for him. And then the family left the hotel together quickly and quietly. It was not till months afterwards that she heard how nearly he had been entangled with an English girl of doubtful reputation. 20 minutes later, the Rolls-Royce bonnet turned towards Rome. Past the little party on its way to the station, Dagmar remarked, "How is it that good Italian women are always dusty?" Uncle Porgy had no idea. Monica Eyeshot hoped this might be the last she would hear of Virtue, but she was not to be so fortunate. Well, okay.
Well, that's an interesting story. Shall we talk about this a little bit, or shall we go on to?
Yeah. I don't mind. It just took me a small while, you know, it does these to get to know the characters and see who's who.
Yeah, I just found it a little bit confusing myself.
Yeah, I did
There are a lot
too.
of characters and it's very packed. So I'm not
Mm.
sure I got this story.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we can go over the plot line there.
Mm.
First of all, everybody is incredibly superficial.
Yeah,
There's not a deep person in the whole lot. And the center of it is that Dagmar had been invited by Uncle Porgy, to go on this trip. But she didn't want to go alone, so she invited Monica.
yeah,
And Monica didn't understand the relationship between Uncle Porgy and Dagmar. That he's really not an uncle.
he's an uncle to no one.
Yeah.
He's an uncle to no one and a pursuer of all. Even on that
Yeah.
first night when they were at the hotel and he was trying to play footsie with Dagmar and Dagmar was being resistant, he immediately switched his attention to playing footsies with Monica, who was
Mm.
and then we've got the Monteforesi, the Italian fellow.
Oh,
And-
what can I say? Mm.
Yeah, who apparently had been dispatched by his family to look for a rich American
Yeah.
or English woman.
Yeah, I get that now because he did ask her was she going to inherit?
Yeah.
Didn't
Yeah, well, he saw them arrive in the Rolls Royce, so he just assumed they were all rich.
that makes sense then.
So in modern day terms, this is like all the things that happen on the internet with it's predominantly, of course, it may be just because I'm a guy that I notice this part, but it's predominantly women pursuing American men, you know, but it's a way of trying to up one's social status and one's financial security. So that's largely what it's about. But apparently Dagmar, you want to take over at this point, Ann?
Dagmar, is Dagmar going out with Uncle Podgy, or is she just using him to get a trip around Italy?
Well, I think she was trying to avoid him in the beginning of the story, but it seems that as the story went on, she decided to accept the part that she had been selected for. You know, that originally she was going to hang out with Monica and use Monica as a foil to keep Uncle Porgy away, but it seems like she gave that up, and then Monica found herself in the uncomfortable position of being pursued by Captain Monteforesi. And she was starting to succumb to his charms. Although I don't think there was anything. I don't think it
No.
really happened when they were locked out of the hotel.
No, I wouldn't think so either. There was
I
talking.
think that they were just chatting away.
Mm.
And Monica was defending herself by talking about the stars, etc., and infinity. But then you know, because they were locked out of the hotel, everybody was scandalized and assumed the worst, including
That's
Uncle Porgy and Dagmar, why they should be scandalized is amazing, since they're pretty scandalous themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
My
But
Lord.
you know, Monica was convinced, I think, although nothing
Mm.
happened, but she was engaged to the good captain.
This is her third engagement, isn't it? Did I read
Yeah, I think there have been three, some before.
Hmm.
I think I did mention that.
Did mention something about that.
Yeah.
Oh, she was so wonderful. She was 22. Her third proposal seemed a distinct echo. So obviously she doesn't take them too seriously.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to tell. Everybody is working on such a superficial plane. You know, Dagmar is plainly a gold digger.
Mm.
Uncle Porgy's clearly a
Yeah, but
rich
they're
guy.
constantly missing when she's looking for them.
Hmm?
They're constantly missing when Monica is looking for them. So when she goes up in the lift, which is funny really, there was an outraged little clock ticking angrily away in the darkness, but no sign of them. And the band
Yeah.
had been silent hours before Dagmar came up. So God knows what they're up to. But it's probably well written. You'd probably, like most of them, you need to read them a second time. Like most of the stories, you need to read a
'Cause
second
you have to
time.
go back. You have to go back, knowing what you know at the end, and go back and
Yeah.
look the trail there. But
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. Hmm.
yeah, but I put this in the category of a slight comedy of manners.
Yeah. And you could envision. I'm having problems saying that word. You could see it's probably well written. It is well written. Because you
I
were
think it
actually
is.
there.
Yeah. Pulls you in
everything,
right from the beginning.
Mm.
Yeah, it dropped us in pretty quick.
Yes.
She is good at doing that for sure.
Mhm.
But it does basically, you know, most of the stories we've read by her makes me despair of the English upper middle and upper classes as being incorrigibly superficial.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, shall we go on to counter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, the non-story and
Counterpart.
who is the first reader this time?
102.
Counterparts. 25.
Okay,
So counterparts.
counterparts. Mhm. Why don't you read first, Katrina?
Okay.
So you and then I'll read and then Ann will read.
Yeah.
Who's in?
Perfect.
Okay. The bell rang furiously, and when Miss Parker went to the tube, a furious voice called out in a piercing North of Ireland accent, "Send Farrington here." Miss Parker returned to her machine, saying to a man who was writing at a desk, "Mr. Allen wants you upstairs." The man muttered, "Blast him," under his breath and pushed back his chair to stand up. When he stood up, he was tall and of great bulk. He had a hanging face, dark wine colored, with fair eyebrows and mustache. His eyes bulged forward slightly, and the whites of them were dirty. He lifted up the counter, and passing by the clients, went out of the office with a heavy step. He went heavily upstairs until he came to the second landing, where a door bore a brass plate with the inscription Mr. Allen, Mr. Allen. Here he halted, puffing with labor and vexation, and knocked. A shrill voice cried, "Come in!" Next, please.
The man entered Mr. Allen's room. Simultaneously, Mr. Allen, a little man, wearing gold-rimmed glasses on a clean-shaven face, shot his head up over a pile of documents. The head itself was so pink and hairless, it seemed like a large egg reposing on the papers. Mr. Allen did not lose a moment. "Barrington, what is the meaning of this? Why have I always to complain of you? May I ask you why you haven't made a copy of that contract between Bodley and Kerwin? I told you it must be ready by 4 o'clock. But Mr. Shelley said, sir. Mr. Shelley said, sir. Kindly attend to what I say and not to what Mr. Shelley says, sir. You always have some excuse or other for shirking work. Let me tell you that if the contract is not copied before this evening, I'll lay the matter before Mr. Crosby. Do you hear me now? Yes, sir. Do you hear me now? Aye, and another little matter. I might as well be talking to the wall as talking to you. Understand, once and for all, that you get a half an hour for your lunch and not an hour and a half. How many courses do you want, I'd like to know? Do you mind me now? Yes, sir. Next, please.
Mr. Allen bent his head again upon his pile of papers. The man stared fixedly at the polished skull which directed the affairs of Crosby and Allen, gauging in its fragilities. A spasm of rage gripped his throat for a few moments and then passed, leaving after it a sharp sensation of thirst. The man recognized the sensation and felt that he must have a good night's drinking. The middle of the mouth was past, and if he could get the copy done in time, Mr. Allen might give him an order on the cashier. He stood still, gazing fixedly at the head upon the pile of papers. Suddenly, Mr. Allen began to upset all the papers, searching for something. Then, as if he had been unaware of the man's presence till that moment, he shot up his head again, saying, are you going to stand there all day? Upon my word, Barrington, you take things easy. I was waiting to see. Very good, you needn't wait to see. Go downstairs and do your work. The man walked heavily towards the door, and as he went out of the room, he heard Mr. Allen cry after him that if the contract was not copied by evening, Mr. Crosby would hear of the matter. He returned to his desk in the lower office and counted the sheets which remained to be copied. He took up his pen and dipped it in the ink, but he continued to stare stupidly at the last words he had written. In no case shall the said Bernard Bodley be. The evening was falling, and in a few minutes they would be lighting the gas. Then he could write. He felt that he must slake the thirst in his throat. He stood up from his desk and, lifting the counter as before, passed out of the office. As he was passing out, the chief clerk looked at him inquiringly. It's all right, Mr. Shelley, said the man, pointing with his finger to indicate the objective of his journey. The chief clerk glanced at the hat rack, but seeing the row complete, offered no remark. As soon as he was on the landing, the man pulled a shepherd's plaid cap out of his pocket, put it on his head, and ran quickly down the rickety stairs. From the street door, he walked on furtively on the inner side of the path towards the corner, and all at once dived into a doorway. He was now safe in the dark snug of O'Neill's shop, and filling up the little window that looked into the bar with his inflamed face. The colour of dark wine, or dark meat, he called out. Here's Pat. Give us a GP like a good fella. Next, please.
The curate brought him a glass of plain porter. The man drank it at a gulp and asked for a caraway seed. He put his penny on the counter and, leaving the curate to grope for it in the gloom, retreated out of the snug as furtively as he had entered it. Darkness, accompanied by a thick fog, was gaining upon the dusk of February, and the lamps in Eustace Street had been lit. The man went up by the houses until he reached the door of the office, wondering whether he could finish his copy in time. On the stairs, a moist, pungent odor of perfume saluted his nose. Evidently, Miss Delacour had come back while he was out in O'Neill's. He crammed his cap back again into his pocket and re-entered the office, assuming an air of absent-mindedness. "Mr. Allen has been calling for you," said the chief clerk severely. Where were you?" The man glanced at the two clients who were standing at the counter as if to intimate that their presence prevented him from answering. As the clients were both male, the chief clerk allowed himself a laugh. "I know that game," he said. 5 times in one day is a little bit. Well, you better look sharp and get a copy of our correspondence in the Delacour case for Mr. Allen. This address in the presence of the public, his run upstairs and the porter he had gulped down so hastily confused the man, and as he sat down at his desk to get what was required, he realized how hopeless was the task of finishing his copy of the contract before 5:30. The dark, damp night was coming, and he longed to spend it in the bars, drinking with his friends amid the glare of gas and clatter of glasses. He got out the Delacour correspondence and passed out of the office. He hoped Mr. Allen would not discover that the last 2 letters were missing. Next, please.
The moist, pungent perfume lay all the way up to Mr. Allen's room. Miss Delacour was a middle-aged woman of Jewish appearance. Mr. Allen was said to be sweet on her or on her money. She came to the office often and stayed a long time when she came. She was sitting beside his desk now in an aroma of perfumes, smoothing the handle of her umbrella and nodding the big black feather in her hat. Mr. Allen had swiveled his chair round to face her and had thrown his right foot jauntily upon his left knee. The man put the correspondence on the desk and bowed respectfully, but neither Mr. Allen nor Miss Delacour took any notice of his bow. Mr. Allen tapped a finger on the correspondence and flicked it towards him as if to say, "That's all right, you may go." The man returned to the lower office and sat down again at his desk. He stared intently at the incomplete phrase. "In no case shall the said Bernard Bodley be," and thought how strange it was that the last 3 words began with the same letter. The chief clerk began to hurry Miss Parker, saying that she would never have the letters typed in time for post. The man listened to the clicking of the machine for a few minutes and then set to work to finish his copy. But his head was not clear, and his mind wandered away to the glare and rattle of the public house. It was a night for hot punches. He struggled on with his copy, but when the clock struck 5, he had still 14 pages to write. Blast it! He couldn't finish in time. He longed to excrete aloud, to bring his fist down on something violently. He was so enraged that he wrote Bernard instead of Bernard Bodley, and had to begin again on a clean sheet. Next.
He felt strong enough to clear out the whole office single-handed. His body ached to do something, to rush out and revel in violence. All the indignities of his life enraged him. Could he ask the cashier privately for an advance? No, the cashier was no good, no damn good. He wouldn't give an advance. He knew where he would meet the boys, Leonard and O'Halloran and Nosey Flynn. The barometer of his emotional nature was set for a spell of riot. His imagination had so abstracted him that his name was called twice before he answered. Mr. Allen and Miss Delacour were standing outside the counter, and all the clerks had turned round in anticipation of something. The man got up from his desk. Miss Allen began a tirade of abuse, saying that 2 letters were missing. The man answered that he knew nothing about them, that he had made a faithful copy. The tirade continued. It was so bitter and violent that the man could hardly restrain his fist from descending upon the head of the mannikin before him. Mannikin. I know nothing about any other two letters, he said stupidly. You know nothing? Of course you know nothing, said Mr. Allen. Tell me, he added, glancing first for approval from the lady beside him. Do you take me for a fool? Do you think I'm me and not a fool? The man glanced from the lady's face to the little egg-shaped head and back again, and almost before he was aware of it, his tongue had found a felicitous moment. I don't think, sir, he said, that's a fair question to put to me. Next, please.
There was a pause in the very breathing of the clerks. Everyone was astounded, the author of the witticism no less than his neighbors, and Miss Delacour, who was a stout, amiable person, began to smile broadly. Mr. Allen flushed to the hue of a wild rose, and his mouth twitched with a dwarf's passion. He shook his fist in the man's face till it seemed to vibrate like the knob of some electric machine. You impertinent ruffian, you impertinent ruffian, I'll make short work of you. Wait till you see. You'll apologize to me for your impertinence, or you'll quit the office instanter. You'll quit this, I'm telling you, or you'll apologize to me. He stood in a doorway opposite the office, watching to see if the cashier would come out alone. All the clerks passed out, and finally the cashier came out with the chief clerk. It was no use trying to say a word to him when he was with the chief clerk. The man felt that his position was bad enough. He had been obliged to offer an abject apology to Mr. Allen for his impertinence, but he knew what a hornet's nest the office would be for him. He could remember the way in which Mr. Allen had hounded little Peake out of the office in order to make room for his own nephew. He felt savage and thirsty and revengeful, annoyed with himself and with everyone else. Mr. Allen would never give him an hour's rest. His life would be hell to him. He had made a proper fool of himself this time. Could he not keep his tongue in his cheek? But they had never pulled together from the first, he and Mr. Allen. Even since the day Mr. Allen had overheard him mimicking his North of Ireland accent to amuse Higgins and Miss Parker. That was the beginning of it. He might have tried Higgins for money, but sure, Higgins never had anything for himself. A man with two establishments to keep up, of course he couldn't. Next, please.
He felt his great body again aching for the comfort of the public house. The fog had begun to chill him, and he wondered, could he touch Pat in O'Neill's? He couldn't touch it for more than a bob, and a bob was of no use. Yet he must get money somewhere or other. He had spent his last penny for the GP, and soon it would be too late for getting money anywhere. Suddenly, as he was fingering his watch chain, he thought of Terry Kelly's pawn office in Fleet Street. That was the dart. Why didn't he think of it sooner? Next, please.
He went through the narrow alley of Temple Bar quickly, muttering to himself that they could all go to hell because he was going to have a good night of it. The clerk in Terry Kelly said a crown, but the consignor held out for 6 shillings, and in the end, the 6 shillings was allowed him literally. He came out of the pawn office joyfully, making a little cylinder of the coins between his thumb and fingers. In Westmoreland Street, the footpaths were crowded with young men and women returning from business, and ragged urchins ran here and there, yelling out the names of the evening editions. The man passed through the crowd, looking on the spectacle generally, and with proud satisfaction, and staring masterfully at the office girls. His head was full of the noises of tram gongs and swishing trolleys, and his nose already sniffed the curling fumes of punch. As he walked on, he preconsidered the terms in which he would narrate the incident to the boys. So I just looked at him coolly, and looked at her. Then I looked back at him again, taking my time, I don't think that there's a fair question to put to me, says I. Nosey Flynn was sitting up in his usual corner of Davy Burns, and when he heard the story, he stood Farrington a half one, saying it was as smart a thing as ever he heard. Farrington stood a drink in his turn, and after a while, O'Halloran and Paddy Leonard came in, and the story was repeated to them. O'Halloran stood tailors of malt, hot, all round, and told the story of the retort he had made to the chief clerk when he was in Callans of Fowne Street. But as the retort was after the manner of the liberal shepherds in the Eclogues, he had to admit that it was not as clever as Farrington's retort. At this, Farrington told the boys to polish off that, and we'd have another one. Next, please.
Just as they were naming their poisons, who should come in but Higgins? Of course, he had to join in with the others. The man asked him to give his version of it, and he did so with great vivacity, for the sight of 5 small hot whiskies was very exhilarating. Everyone roared laughing when he showed the way in which Mr. Allen shook his fist in Farrington's face. Then he imitated Farrington, saying, "And who is my nabs, as cool as you please," while Farrington looked at the company out of his heavy, dirty eyes, smiling and at times drawing forth stray drops of liquor from his mustache with the aid of his lower lip. When that round was over, there was a pause. O'Halloran had money, but neither of the other two seemed to have any, so the whole party left the shop somewhat regretfully. In the corner of Duke Street, Higgins and Nosey Flynn beveled off to the left while the other 3 turned back towards the city. Rain was drizzling down on the cold streets, and when they reached the ballast office, Farrington suggested the Scotch House. The bar was full of men and loud with the noises of tongues and glasses. The 3 men pushed past the whining match sellers at the door and formed a little party at the corner of the counter. They began to exchange stories. Leonard introduced them to a young fellow named Weathers, who was performing at the Tivoli as an acrobat and knockabout artiste. Farrington stood a drink all around. Weathers said he would take a small Irish and a Apollinaris. Farrington, who had definite notions of what was what, asked the boys if they would have an Apollinaris too, but the boys told Tim to make theirs hot. The talk became theatrical. O'Halloran stood a round, and then Farrington stood another round, Weathers protesting that the hospitality was too Irish. He promised to get them in behind the scenes and introduce them to some nice girls. O'Halloran said he and Leonard would go, but Farrington wouldn't go because he was a married man, and Farrington's heavy, dirty eyes leered at the company in token that he had understood he was being chafed. Weathers made them all have just one little tincture at his expense and promised to meet them later on at Mulligan's in Poolbeg Street. Next, please.
When the Scotch House closed, they went round to Mulligan's. They went into the parlor at the back, and O'Halloran ordered small hot specials all around. They were all beginning to feel mellow. Farrington was just standing another round when Weathers came back. Much to Farrington's relief, he drank a glass of bitter this time. Funds were getting low, but they had enough to keep going. Presently, 2 young women with big hats and a young man in a check suit came in and sat at a table close by. Weathers saluted them and told the company they were out of the Tivoli. Farrington's eyes wandered at every moment in the direction of one of the young women. There was something striking in her appearance. An immense scarf of peacock blue muslin was wound round her hat and knotted in a great bow under her chin. She wore bright yellow gloves reaching to the elbow. Farrington gazed admiringly at the plump arm, which she moved very often and with much grace. And when, after a little time, she answered his gaze, he admired still more her large, dark brown eyes. The bleak, staring expression in them fascinated him. She glanced at him once or twice, and when the party was leaving the room, she brushed against a chair and said, "Oh, pardon," in a London accent. He watched her leave the room in the hope that she would look back at him, but he was disappointed. He cursed his want of money and cursed all the rounds he had stood, particularly all the whiskies and all Panaris which he had stood to Weathers. There was one thing that he hated, it was a sponge. He was so angry that he lost count of the conversation of his friends. Next.
When Paddy Leonard called him, he found that they were talking about feats of strength. Weathers was showing his biceps muscle to the company and boasting so much that the other two had called on Farrington to uphold the national honour. Farrington pulled up his sleeve accordingly and showed his bicep muscle to the company. The two arms were examined and compared, and finally it was agreed to have a trial of strength. The table was cleared and the two men rested their elbows on it, clasping hands. When Paddy Leonard said, "Go," each was to try to bring down the other's hand onto the table. Farrington looked very serious and determined. The trial began. After about 30 seconds, Weathers brought his opponent's hand slowly down onto the table. Farrington's dark, wine-coloured face flushed darker still with anger and humiliation at having been defeated by such a stripling. "You're not to put the weight of your body behind it. Play fair," he said. "Who's not playing fair?" said the other. "Come on again, the two best out of three." The trial began again. The veins stood out on Farrington's forehead, and the pallor of Weathers' complexion changed to creamy. Their hands and arms trembled under the stress. After a long struggle, Weathers again brought his opponent's hand slowly onto the table. The curate, who was standing beside the table, nodded his red head towards the victor and said with stupid familiarity, "Aye, that's the knack." "What the hell do you know about it?" said Farrington fiercely, turning on the man. "What do you put in your gob for?" "Shh," said O'Halloran, observing the violent expression of Farrington's face. "Pony up, boys. We'll have just one little small more and then we'll be off. Next, please.
A very sullen face.
Oh,
Your turn,
yes.
please.
A very sullen-faced man stood at the corner of O'Connell Bridge, waiting for the little Sandymount tram to take him home. He was full of smoldering anger and revengefulness. He felt humiliated and discontented. He did not even feel drunk, and he had only twopence in his pocket. He cursed everything he had done for himself in the office, pawned his watch, spent all his money, and he had not even got drunk. He began to feel thirsty again, and he longed to be back again in the hot, reeking public house. He had lost his reputation as a strong man, having been defeated twice by a mere boy. His heart swelled with fury, and when he thought of the woman in the big hat who had brushed against him and said pardon, his fury nearly choked him. His tram led him down to Shelburne Road, and he steered his great body along the shadow of the wall of the barracks. He loathed returning to his home. When he went in by the side door, he found the kitchen empty and the kitchen fire out. He bawled upstairs, "Ada! Ada!" Next, please.
His wife was a sharp-faced woman who bullied her husband when he was sober and was bullied by him when he was drunk. They had 5 children. A little boy came running down the stairs. "Who's that?" the man said, peering through the darkness. "Me, Pa." "Who are you, Charlie?" "No, Pa, Tom." "Where's your mother?" "She's out at the chapel." "That's right. Did she think of leaving any dinner for me?" "Yes, Pa, Light the lamp. What do you mean by having the place in darkness? Are the other children in bed?" The man sat down heavily on one of the chairs while the little boy lit the lamp. He began to mimic his son's flat accent, saying half to himself, at the chapel, if you please." When the lamp was lit, he banged his fist on the table and shouted, "What's for my dinner?" Next, please.
"I'm going to cook it, Pa," said the little boy. The man jumped up furiously and pointed to the fire. "On that fire? You let the fire out. By God, I'll teach you to do that again." He took a step to the door and seized a walking stick, which was standing behind it. "I'll teach you to let the fire out," he said, rolling up his sleeve in order to give his arm free play. The little boy cried, "Oh, Pa," and ran whimpering around the table, but the man followed him and caught him by the coat. The little boy looked about him wildly, but seeing no way of escape, fell upon his knees. Now you let the fire out the next time, said the man, striking at him vigorously with the stick. Take that, you little whelp. The boy uttered a squeal of pain as the stick cut his thigh. He clasped his hand together in the air, and his voice shook with fright. Oh, Pa, he cried, don't beat me, Pa. And I'll say Hail Mary for you. I'll say Hail Mary for you, Pa. If you don't beat me, I'll say Hail Mary. Oh, God, that's awful.
Wow,
Cards.
that's quite a story.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is quite a story. To put all that in a 9-page story is freaking incredible.
Absolutely. It's incredible. I agree totally with Duncan.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Wow.
It's so well written.
Mm.
Every part of it, you could see. I mean, even the part like that he has like a flat cap instead of like a cap that you'd hang up in the office so that they don't know he's missing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, well, I began to recognize it was a great story after he went into Alan's office and got bawled out the first time, and immediately he started thinking he got a thirst in his throat, and you know, just had to get out and go and have a pint.
Mm.
I mean, you know, but right there, it was like, wow, this is like explaining a high percentage of alcoholism right there.
Absolutely.
Those
Yeah.
few little pages, just, you know.
Mm.
Absolutely.
And then to end up with him beating his
Yeah.
child at the end, I mean, it's just the
Awful.
whole thing is brilliantly awful.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. And Nosy Flynn and Paddy Leonard appears in it. I love when that happens.
Uh-huh.
No, it's really good. It was just completely different. It's riveting, to be honest. I was
Mhm.
totally.
Yeah, right. I think today that of the two stories that were picked, this is definitely the vastly superior story.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine they used to write everything out.
Excuse me?
I said, I can imagine they used to write everything out.
Yeah.
You know,
Copy it.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
They had scribes. Yeah, a lot
literally,
of the scribes. Yeah.
physically
Huh.
write it out.
Yeah, well, that was Tiny Tim's father's job, right? And Scrooge's off.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Was indeed. And then for mothers in chapel, and there's 5 children at home.
Yeah.
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 Well, and then obviously the son that got beaten was, you know, left in
You're
charge of
supposed
it.
to keep an eye on the fire, I suppose.
Yeah, but that little thing about you know, that the mother, what they say, bullied the father when he was sober and
When
he
he's so,
was drunk.
yeah. What a life.
Ah,
And even the description of him, because I thought it was somebody else, a very sullen-faced man stood at the corner of O'Connell Bridge waiting for the little Sandymount tram to take him home. Smalls, because he's like, I suppose because he's lost everything and been so silly, he'd be just small.
yeah.
Smoldering.
It also portrayed that whole thing of at the beginning of a drunk, when you've got the money in your pocket and you're able to treat the people around you. It's like being on top of the world, and then halfway through he's starting to regret all the money he spent, because of course it was borrowed money.
Of course. Yeah. And he's probably going to lose his job as well.
Yeah.
Because now he's going to be, because he got rid of somebody else before.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Pete.
Mr. Allen.
Yep.
So he
Well,
knows that.
one would suspect that Mr. Allen's also like the father beating his child.
That's right.
you
Yes.
know,
And humiliating him and with his
humiliating him, right? Because of course he wants, Mr. Allen wants to feel in control because Miss Delacour is coming. And he's attracted to Miss Delacour and he wants to impress her. And apparently she's interested in Mr. Allen also.
She's wealthy Jew, isn't she? Or Jew looking.
She's either Jewish or she's Jewish looking. I forget which it was.
Oh yeah, a woman of Jewish appearance.
Yeah, and then look at this page. I don't have the page numbers, unfortunately. Maybe page 55. Mr. Allen flushed to the hue of a wild rose, and his mouth twitched with a dwarf's passion.
Yeah.
Oh. Is,
He shook his fist in the man's face till it seemed to vibrate like the knob of some electric machine. This is right after, this is right after Farrington gets his story of the night out. Do you take me for a fool? Do you take me for an utter fool? I don't think, sir, that's a fair question to put to me. And you just know that he already knew that he was saying that so he could tell the other guys at the bar later that he's going to get his shot in.
Tell him the story. have it hugely exaggerated.
Right. And they had there's a pause, and I remember all the clerks gathered around. They knew things were going to go down.
Excellent.
We may have to read this one again.
Yeah.
Maybe in a week or two. Even though the three of us have read it, if we have another,
Yeah.
three other people, we can bring it back. It would be well worth reading again.
I'd like to read it again. Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, it was excellent.
Huh.
All right. Other comments?
No, I'll definitely. There's no comparison tonight between the two of them.
Yeah, I don't think
There's definitely one out.
One is on the surface of the water, and the other one is, very deep underneath. And
Yeah, exactly.
It's not only a great story of characters, but it's kind of emblematic as well. You can be sure that James Joyce either witnessed stories like this or heard his father tell stories like this.
I would imagine. Exactly.
All right. Well, I don't know about you all, but I am full and satisfied. And
Yes.
Thanks.
I think
You have a lovely holiday, Katrina.
Thank you. And I will see you in 2 weeks. Right. Not next Monday, but the following Monday. And I'll be in I'll be in Montana then for the summer. So
all right. Well, Anne will remind me. I'll resist suggesting the story until you come back.
Yeah, please. I'd like
But I think today was a good lesson in how it's probably a good idea to manage me to put up a reading list, even if there's just three.
Oh,
yeah. Absolutely. It's very easy to get confused.
It is.
Well, sometimes I just get so excited. Sometimes I'm just spaced out, and sometimes I'm just so excited about reading the story that I just.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, you
Well,
all
thank
Thank
take
you